Hey everybody, and welcome to the North Park Youth Podcast. This is our first episode, and I'm here with Hannah Smith. Say hi, Hannah.
Hi.
And we're so excited to be here for the first time. This is something we've been thinking about for a long time, but it really wasn't until this week that we had an action plan. So I'm going to get Hannah to tell you a little bit about that action plan and kind of what we're thinking for these next few podcasts.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, basically what we're going to do with these podcasts is use it to recap whatever the message was on the Wednesday night before. So, for example, for this week, Josh spoke last night. It was a great message. So we're just going to kind of recap a couple of our favorite points, maybe talk about a few behind the scenes things. How did Josh come up with some stuff, or whoever the speaker is? Any fun stories behind while he was filming, or anything that happened while he was prepping for his sermon. And then just say some of our key takeaways and share kind of what we learned from the message, or what Josh learned, or whoever the speaker was, kind of throughout the process of making the message.
Yeah, and one of the fun things about doing this for the first time now is that we're having to do it remotely, right? Like we had originally when we were talking about podcasts, we thought let's do it in a studio, and now we're doing it like this. But we made it work, we think. I don't know. We're recording now. We're going to find out afterwards whether or not it's going to work. But let me start off with a recap of last night's teaching. So we started off our influence series, and it's only a 2-part series. And last night we talked a little bit about influence. I got to share a story about when I was in junior high, and my small group leader kind of pulled me aside and said some really important words. He said, "You have influence," and how that kind of set me on this journey of recognizing my influence, right? And so we talked about that, and then we also said the kind of transition point was this phrase: our influence is best used when we recognize the hope that we have in Jesus and when we act in his power. So this is kind of like the main idea of this series. So we know we have influence, but it's best used when we act in hope, and then we act in God's power. And so this week I kind of talked about hope and what that means. And then next week, Maddie Eckert's going to talk about power. The idea about hope, I tend to always go back to the book of Hebrews, and this was a great opportunity to do it because they talk about hope. It's like the underlying theme of the whole book. And so I talked a lot about their experience in hopelessness, and the author of Hebrews really pushing this idea of hope and how we can have hope because we know that God keeps his promises. And then so we talked about hope, and then we kind of finished off by talking about this idea of if we want to see God do things, he can do them without us, but we are invited to be a part of it. And so we need to be actively participating in what God is doing here on earth. And so that's talking about using our influence and then using God's hope to be able to leverage our influence to use it the way that God intended. So that was kind of the overall idea of what we talked about last night. Was that clear enough? Was that short enough? Was it too long? Could I go longer? I don't know.
I think that was honestly perfect. Yeah,
okay.
That was like a perfect synopsis, wrapped in a tiny little bow.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, because I was feeling a little nervous there. So now we have a recap. What we'll do is give our initial thoughts. So Hannah's going to give an initial thought from the teaching, and then I'm going to give an initial thought. So Hannah, what are you thinking for your initial thought?
So my initial thought, is it bad that my initial thought is not really about what you it's about what you spoke about, but it's not about a point that you made in a way.
That's not a bad thing. No,
it
that's
extrapolates.
Fine. Yeah, extrapolate away.
There you go. I felt like Olivia using a big word. So I've been reading through, actually I just finished a book by Jenny Allen, which if you have never read any of her stuff, you definitely should, because she's amazing. It's called Nothing to Prove. It's a book of hers.
Okay.
And at the very end of it, in the end of the last chapter, it kind of talks about the same thing in terms of influence, and how you have influence, but it doesn't come from you. It comes through Jesus working through you. And I wish I had looked at the book before this, because then I could have quoted it, because she says a really, really interesting point about how basically if our focus is making an impact on the world through ourselves, then people are going to see us for us. Whereas if we're prayerfully using our gifts and talents in the way that God has given us, or in the opportunities that God has given us to use those gifts and talents, then we have the opportunity to make an influence and to positively influence other people with Jesus through us. So instead
Right.
of a point that really stood out to me was she was like, instead of basically people being like, oh, like Josh, for example, that was a really good sermon, Josh. Instead of that, it would be, oh, I really like saw God through that sermon. So it actually like takes you completely out of the equation.
Yeah.
So like the influence that you could have on other people really has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with God moving through you.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
awesome.
so your message just really like connected with what I had just been reading.
Cool.
So it's
Awesome.
kinda cool.
That was a great initial thought. I love it.
Thank you.
So, and I asked you to go first, and I realized now yours is so much more positive than mine because my initial thought was that hope is really hard right now. So I was thinking and preparing for this teaching, and I like just realizing like we're in a moment of a lot of hopelessness. You know, having conversations with students over the last little bit, and the feelings of hopelessness that they have, and you know, within our circles of friends and everything, and like we're just seeing so much hopelessness. And I think it's good and bad, right? Because we recognize that you know, we are in this season, but if we can then go back and dig deep and understand that God remains faithful and we can still have hope in God, hopefully we can find we can find our way out of this season with hope, right? And so yeah, that was my initial thought. I did I have anything else written down here? Oh yeah, so we are feeling hopeless, but we're also not the first group of people to feel hopeless, right? Like this is not, you know, I think sometimes we're worried that we're like the first people to feel what we're feeling, you know, like we feel like maybe we're the first generation. You know, I know you and I are we're different generations, right? I'm a millennial, and I think you're a Gen Z or yeah, something like
I
that.
actually don't know.
And so, but we're like, our generations are not the first to feel hopeless, right? This is not new. It's something we see throughout generations upon generations. So there's like an understanding that like we can get through this, which is really good. And especially when we understand the hope that Christ brings, we know for sure that we can get through it. So that was my initial thought. Okay, so let's move on, and we're trying to be quick with these podcasts. That's the other thing. Where I can see my camera, we're about like 7-8 minutes already.
Wow.
But you know, but that's okay because this is our first one, and we're gonna get better week by week, hopefully. So the second thing is, what's one takeaway that you had? And I know like an initial thought seems similar to a takeaway, but maybe like what's one like action item that you feel like you can take advantage of from this teaching?
Yeah. So I think my action item probably goes really well with what your initial takeaway was.
Yeah.
Because I think it has been easy, especially for me anyways, over the past few weeks to feel more, wow, this is not, I was going to say more hopeless, but I feel like that's like a weird, like, anyways.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I think you know what I mean. But anyways, just because like it's been like we've been going back into lockdown and it's like dark and it's winter and school started again. It's just all these things, and it's really easy to be like, oh, like what do we do now? And like what am I doing? But something that I have to remind myself when I get into those moments of hopelessness is that because Jesus works through us, like he can work through us at any time.
Yep.
So whether it's we need to be learning something right now so that we can influence people later on, or whether it's we can be influencing people right now through like the person you see at the grocery store and that you smile at them, or someone you're walking by on the street. Like I feel like it's really easy in moments like this to be like there's nothing I can do, or like there's nothing that like there's no point to anything I'm doing, but like God can, because it's God that works through you and because it's not you, he can use anything, and he can use you to influence others, or he can influence you through anything. So I think in some ways that gives me hope that I'm like, oh, even though it might not feel like there's very many ways to find hope right now, like there's lots of different things that like God can still be moving in even now. So I think that that's something for sure that's a takeaway for me.
Yeah, that's big. I think mine would be similar, like starting small, right? Like taking those small opportunities to do things. I actually here we're gonna cross over a little bit into behind the scenes, but there was an audio issue near the end of my teaching, and it was when I was giving examples of like practical ways that students could use their influence to bring hope to other people, right? And I talked through how like there's a lot of people out there who just need a FaceTime call right now. You know, like there's a lot of people, whether it's like grandparents who, you know, like we talked to Bree's grandparents, and they're lonely, right? Like they don't have many opportunities to talk to people. And so they love and value those like FaceTime calls or just a phone call. And so like that was the one thing. And then the other thing I said was, you know, like there might be people out there that need to hear something really encouraging because they're not hearing like those like positive and encouraging things in their life. And so just a simple text to somebody to say, hey, I was thinking about you. You're great. Like that goes so far these days. So
I think if I can interject
Absolutely.
for just a second, I think it's an interesting point too, because a lot of times we don't realize the influence or the impact thing, like even just the small things. So like FaceTiming someone or answering a FaCetime from someone and you're like, I don't want to answer this. It happens to all of us. Or like just smiling at someone, or like your was it your camp counselor or your mentor?
Yeah, well, he was a small group leader of mine, and you know, doing camp counseling.
Yeah, but like that leader might not have realized that when he said that to you that was going to be such like that was going to make such an impact on you.
Sure.
Or like, so anything small or big that we say or do can have such a large impact on someone else that we don't even realize. So that's just like makes it even more important that we should be like working through what God is telling us, because or like through like just being kind to people and like loving people, because like positive and negatives can have massive impacts on other people that you would never even know.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, that wraps up like the actual teaching, you know, recap portion. And we want to talk quickly, and again, we're running technically overtime, even though we don't. There's no actual time.
We said 10 to 15. No, we said 5 to 10.
5 to 10. But that's okay. That's okay.
I tried.
So quickly, we'll talk a little bit about some behind the scenes stuff, and I'm gonna go this week. I'm gonna go like full on tech on you guys. Is that okay? Does that work?
We give you permission, Josh.
Yeah. So what happened this week was like Hannah and I knew that we were going to be doing this week online. We knew like this week and next week we knew was going to be online, but we also had as of a week ago today, so we're doing this podcast on a Thursday. So a week ago Thursday, we were planning to get together in the morning to film at the church, right? You know, get the masks on, go in the building. You know, we do it all, everything safe. But then that day we got a message saying, hey, the building's going to be shut down. You only can come in if you desperately need something. And so we were like, all right, let's go. And we met at the church to gather a bunch of gear and set things up at home, right? And so you saw Hannah doing worship at home. The studio that we set up here at home is kind of all in full force. But in setting like all new gear up, there are going to be problems. So, Hannah, did you have any problems this week?
Well, let me tell you. Oh my gosh. I had to record worship, I think 4 or 5 times, the whole set, because there was a mystery buzzing sound, and every time I would test it, the buzzing would not be there, and it was fine, and I'd heard it was like great sound. And so I'd record the whole thing. Literally, I kid you not, every time, just when I hit record on like the cameras, record on everything, and then I would start, that would be the buzzing time. And I was so frustrated. But it worked out. I don't know where it came from. I texted Josh, and he was like, flip this switch. And I was like, I have no idea what that is, but I'll flip all the things. And anyways, we figured it out. So I'm also recording worship later today. So I'm hoping that does not come back. But we'll
absolutely.
see.
And then for me, like I was trying to figure out a whole new setup, and you know, we've got we've got the computer and everything set up in here. And I was using a software called OBS, not to get too technical, but what was happening was the camera and the audio was both going into the computer, but then if the software were to lag a little bit, everything would go out of sync. So all of a sudden my words and my mouth would be totally out of sync. And it was it was so frustrating setting up, and it was frustrating editing as well. And so I'm going to have to come up with a whole new system for next week because, I'm going to try and go old school again and just record to memory cards and then pair it up. But
that's what I'm doing.
Anyways,
I'm just doing old school.
Yeah.
Also, I love how we're like, here's the technical side of it. And I'm like, there was a weird buzzing. And Josh is like, well, here's why. There was the thing that didn't match up.
Yeah, that's because I am such a nerd when it comes to this stuff. But I'm just learning everything. That's the weird part. Like, I enjoy learning about it, but then all these like little frustrations and everything, it makes me not want to enjoy it as much, but I still do. It's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little behind the scenes on our technical difficulties this week, and hopefully it'll just get better. But we did this. Yeah, we did this again. We did this in the spring as well, where it's like, we're going to get so good at this, and then we'll be back on site. So,
Oh, I have to tell you before we go.
Yeah.
Olivia sent me a video last night. It was of our last online service of the spring. Mm-hmm. And right before we started worship, I said at the beginning of it, I was like, do you realize this might be the last time we ever do online worship? And Olivia texted me last night and she goes, Hannah jinxed it. I was like, well, oops, sorry.
Man. Well, it's
sorry,
good one,
everyone.
Hannah. Yeah. Man, well, it's like it's hard because we want to balance getting good at this and doing it really well, but then also we want to be back on site, right? That was the sentiment last night. Like, we just all want to see each other. That's like in the Instagram live ahead of time. What's one thing you want to see from youth on Wednesday nights? And we want to be back in person. Yeah. So yeah, we all feel the same way. Okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you so much for watching or listening to our first North Park Youth podcast. We're trying to, I think right now it's on Spotify and Pocket Casts, which is the app that I use. And then you can also find it on Anchor. And then eventually it should be on iTunes, which another whack of people get their stuff on. So hopefully you'll be able to listen to this anywhere, watch it on IGTV, watch it on YouTube. But hopefully you enjoyed this, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.